Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Future of Learning series. Happy Monday. It's so great that you could join us. For those of you whose first time it is joining us, this is a series where we get to unpack what the future of learning holds. And we're so fortunate to have next-gen teachers, creators, experts, entrepreneurs, and investors all bringing their very, very interesting perspectives to what the future of learning holds. As you know, this is a series hosted by Game Changer Sessions, a series that we started earlier this year, and in partnership with Mastermind, which is a new live learning platform that we're incubating at Game Changer. This week is a really packed week. We're super excited. We actually have another episode on Wednesday with Naveed Nathu, who is the founder of the Knowledge Society. So join us again at 12 o'clock on Wednesday for Naveed, who's doing incredible things. He's teaching kids, like really young kids, how to create exponential success. So very excited about that. And I couldn't be more thrilled to introduce our guest today. Our guest today is Matt Wyndowe. I've known Matt for a very long time. I'm just aging myself by how long that's actually been. Matt is a Toronto native who left to go to the Valley many, many years ago. And Matt today is the Chief Business Officer of a phenomenal company called Lambda School. And we're going to unpack exactly what Lambda School is doing, but basically it's revolutionary. It is a incredible platform that teaches anybody how to code, and you don't need to pay for it until you actually get a job. But just backtracking on Matt, Matt is somebody who understands the power of community. He hosts an incredible dinner every year in Toronto for a few of us tech geeks to sort of talk about where tech's going. And the reason why is his career has been phenomenal. He was very, very early at Facebook, and he actually had the chance to work at Uber. He was product partnership lead. He managed the product partnerships at Uber, and he was at Facebook. And he's also runs an incredible fund called Graph Ventures. Matt, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Candice, so great to chat. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a real pleasure for you to be here. So Matt, are you in San Francisco today?
I am in Pacific Heights in San Francisco.
Awesome. So Matt, not very long ago, most probably just about a year ago, you and I were talking about, education. And, I think we've both been very passionate around what the future of education holds. And I think it was July last year that you joined Lambda School. Is that right?
Sounds about right, yeah.
Something like that. So Matt, tell us what Lambda School is and how it works. I know you're somebody who's very thoughtful around which companies you're going to spend a lot of time with, and you chose to join Lambda School. Tell us a bit more about it.
Sure. So Lambda School is a new approach to engineering and tech education. So at its most basic, it's a 7-month entirely remote program with high quality curriculum, live instruction, and peer-based learning. Of course, what we're known for is upfront tuition is $0, and you only pay when you get a high-paying job. In that case, so you pay nothing upfront, and when you get a high-paying job, you pay a certain percent of your income for up to 2 years or up to a 30K cap. So the thing about Lambda that's special, the big takeaway, is it's entirely aligned with student outcomes. So incentives are very much aligned for students who want to get a better job from education, if that's their primary. And what's interesting about this model is it fundamentally changes accessibility, both to education and also to economic mobility, because essentially it lowers 3 of the biggest barriers. You have geographical. Historically, you want to get an education. It was the standard thing is you leave your community to go get educated, right? Which is a big barrier. Yep. Second is financial. In the US, most of my data will be US data, but in the US, standard now is you go into debt 40, 60, 80, 200K to get an education. Whereas in this, you pay nothing up front. You're not taking on that financial risk. And the third thing is temporal, where the traditional model is 4 years. We accomplish the same thing in around 7 months. And we believe we give you an equivalent of 4-year education in 7 months. So essentially, one way to look at Lambda is sort of like vocational school 2.0. If you want to improve your family's lot in life and you want to use education to get there, we believe that this model represents a fundamental change because of our incentive-aligned system.
Wow. And so when you think about it, the alternatives are institutions, and that model has not really changed very much in a very long time. Can you unpack some of the macro trends that you think are making this the perfect storm? I'll just comment. I think you raised $74 million not very long ago, like 2 months ago, for this model. So something must be working pretty well for you guys.
Yeah, we have some pretty exciting initial indications that there is a real, I would say, product market fit here, both on the benefit to students and also on the employer end. You asked about sort of macro things. So to address that, so some of the interesting issues we're facing societally is, I think if you look back at the 20th century, basically you have productivity going dramatically up and to the right at a pretty steep slope. And you had historically in the early 20th century, incomes were also rising at the same clip. And that they pretty much go up in lockstep up until like the late 70s, early 80s. And then basically average and median incomes sort of flatline, but productivity still goes up. So essentially what you've had is 2 or 3 generations for a huge chunk of people in North America essentially economically stagnate for 2 or 3 generations. And it's pretty hard to overstate the psychological, economic, cultural, and even like political effects of that. And I think you see some of those in the world today. So like, just to think last century, the chances that you would make more money than your parents in the US was like up to 90+%. You were just going to do better than your parents. Now that number has dipped below 50%. So just like think about that for a second and think how that hits the average person.
Absolutely.
What's also interesting is like basically the chance of whether or not you're going to be the 50% who make more or less, the absolute number one predictor is the zip code you grew up in. So thinking about that for a second, it's sort of entirely antithetical to like this concept of the American dream or the promise of Western capitalist liberal society, where like essentially things are supposed to keep getting better for people. That's sort of the promise, right? And that's sort of fallen apart. Right now, you've got average income of an American, median income is about 34K, I believe. And you've got about 22 million people in post-secondary education trying to improve that. And many of those we're seeing are getting incredibly burdened by debt and actually getting financially much worse off for that experience. So certainly on the sort of societal side, there's some big trends. One other thing probably worth pointing out is on the employer side, on the other side of the equation, you basically have had this shift. We went from industrial age to sort of the information age and the information economy. And with that, what you need is a total transformation of skills at a pace and scale never seen before in the workplace. The demands on education have never been higher. And you sort of alluded to this, Candice, where the traditional model has not changed in hundreds of years and is sort of built for like rich people, rich aristocrats in Western Europe. Like it's not really built today and it hasn't really dramatically changed. So you have, on one side, you have 100 million Americans who would be desiring of a moving up and getting better economic mobility. You have 22 million people in post-secondary education with this system, which is become 3x as expensive. The outcomes have gotten worse. It's failing people who are using that as a mechanism.
Right.
And on the other side, you have millions and millions of unfilled tech jobs. People cannot hire these tech roles. You see it all the time in your startups.
For
You see
sure.
it. You've worked at larger companies and Torstar and other things. You see it. And basically, someone needs to connect that enormous societal need for economic mobility and better education, more practical education, I should say, with this enormous demand for new knowledge workers. And how do you do that, right, is the question. So our point of view is you do it by dramatically lowering the barriers to entry, having the school take on the risk, and being aligned with the incentive aligned with the students.
Fascinating. And so let's unpack it a little bit. How do you actually take 4 years of school and create, a program that's 7 months that basically anybody from around the world could participate in for free in order to do this? And, one of the things I'm super curious about, especially since the pandemic hit, is this notion of cohort-based virtual live learning experiences. And it seems to be that that's Lambda's, a big part of Lambda's model. Can you explain to us, how do you actually prepare people in something that would take 4 years in 7 months?
Yeah, absolutely. So the traditional, so first of all, there's something about Lambda that's very important, is we are there to get you a high-paying job, to change your career trajectory, to improve your family's lot in life. That is our raison d'etre. That is why we are there. There are things that happen at a traditional 4-year school that we do not do, right? There are general learnings that you do. There's liberal arts things. You take courses in other areas. You walk to class. You have time in between class. You have different schedules. You participate in social things. All those are great. That's not what we do. There are ways you can tag that onto the experience, obviously. I think what you asked, one of the things you asked there, which I think there's some, from a numbers perspective, I went to McGill, and in computer science in McGill, the absolute number of hours that you get actually programming, it's probably south of 1,000. Maybe depending on the person you are, it could be north, depending on the courses you take. At Lambda, we are doing, I should say maybe 1,000 to 1,500. Depends what you're taking. I took very theoretical stuff when I did a computer science minor, but I took very theoretical stuff. At Lambda, you're going to get 1,500 to 2,000 hours of programming experience, which is equivalent to the amount of actual programming you're going to get at a traditional 4-year school. So,
wow. So in 7 months.
In 7 months. Yeah. And importantly, also, we're working on really practical real world projects. So a big component of our school is every unit, which is every month for full-time or every 2 months for part-time, you will work on a group project where basically you go into sprints with other peers, and you'll work on a project and take it from zero to complete code base. And that is actually what you do in the real world work environment. That's what we hear from employers that they want day one. So we want people, when they start work, to seem like someone who's already had a year of work experience. And so we have that repeatedly throughout the program. And you end your program with a capstone project where we're further mimicking the work environment by you work cross-functionally. So someone from web programming gets to work with someone from data science and user interface design to build a project. But importantly, the project they build there is going to be a living code base that they pass on to the next group. Because another thing you have to learn when you're actually in the real world workplace is you don't start from scratch. You actually have to start from someone else's code, and there's joys and pains of that. And so for us, that practical, the practical nature of that's really important.
So it sounds like, yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it sounds like the notion of real world, practicality, right? What I love about what you're saying is it's super focused, right? You're not there for any other reason than to get this person a vocational job in the fields of data science and development. Number one. Number two, you're saying, let's actually give you as much of a real world experience as humanly possible, because that's ultimately what you're going to do. And the idea of immersion and project-based learning, right? Which is like, let's do this, what would have taken you 4 years in like 7 months and with a group of people. Fascinating. And how does this scale? Like, does it scale? Clearly it does, since you just raised $74 million. How do you think about scale?
So you mentioned cohort-based learning, and I think that's interesting for a number of perspectives. And it's sort of intertwined with the scale issue, which is from a student perspective, from an individual student perspective, the biggest benefit to cohort-based learning is that it is a shared experiences, or sort of research shows shared experiences will increase your rate of learning. The community aspect is very, very important there. So you have the mentorship, you have the support, you have the camaraderie that goes through the program, and that really enriches your learning experience and allows you to take more of it in. There is an adage in medical school. I know they have this adage, but this sort of applies generally, which is to really learn something, you need to see it, you need to do it, and you need to teach it. So throughout our program, people are not only interacting with their peers, they're interacting from people ahead of themselves in the program, and they're interacting with people behind them in the program. And that's tremendously important from a learning model perspective and sort of a pedagogy perspective. Second big benefit, frankly, is just keeping people motivated. Like, listen, how do you get 4 years into 7 months? It's like through a lot of hard work, right? Like this is like, it's like, how do you take, it's as hard as doing something like, getting into shape or something like that. This takes a lot of resolve. This takes, people are doing 40, 50 hours a week at their computer, learning a skill they haven't done before. This is hard stuff. It's not easy. And a lot of them are being stretched more than they've ever been stretched before. So, we have people literally who have been in the military who say this is the hardest thing they've ever done.
Wow. So there's a reason it's called a boot camp. It's for good reason it's called a boot camp, is your point.
And don't forget the sort of most of the other people in the space, a lot of whom are doing exciting things, are 2.5, 3 month, maybe 4 month programs. So there's and some of those are part-time and others. And so ours is most intensive. So another benefit of the cohort-based model is it keeps folks moving towards their goal. You cannot overstate the importance of social accountability to keep you on track. And if you're doing these things async and you're doing it on your own pacing and stuff, you're going to get the kind of dropout rates that you see in, most async courses, like 98%, people who start. And so,
say that again.
Fine,
so
if you want to learn
I just want to make sure I heard what you said. So I think Seth Godin on our last session when he was on also mentioned, something like this. But say the statistics you said again, the dropout rate of pre-recorded asynchronous courses. I just want to make sure our audience heard. What was the dropout?
Yes, right. So this would be for a traditional, if you wanted to teach someone, if you wanted to offer a class where you basically took someone from a manager of a restaurant to a data scientist, and you wanted to do it solely through pre-recorded lessons, some people will finish that. I would expect you would see 98% of people not finish it.
Wow. Yeah. So the power of your peer group is a huge element of that completion.
Maybe here's an analogy, right? Like you could say, in theory, there's no reason that you can't get into great shape by here's a video of how to use an exercise bike, right? For sure. In theory, if you have the grit, you can watch that one video, learn how to watch a how-to video on YouTube, learn how to safely use an exercise bike, and then work out for 3 months in a row and get in the best shape of your life.
Right.
The reality is there's reasons things like Peloton work, because you take the core skill, but you wrap it with amazing, engaging live instruction, but also a community that supports you and keeps you motivated. That is what takes it from something that in theory will work to something that in practice works for people, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and eventually millions of people at scale. So in some ways, a lot of the same, you could think of us as the Peloton of coding education, but in the same way that it is, the experience is as important as the substance you learn.
I think what you say is so true. And it's why, we're so passionate about this idea of community, that like you really need to be with people in order to have better learning outcomes. And I'm curious, like when you think about Lambda's vision and the next 5 years, is this just about data science and developer education, or do you see this model being applied to a whole bunch of other categories? And if so, which categories do you think are the best fit for remote, live, virtual, cohort-based learning experiences?
Yeah, so I would say, first of all, we're very now focused just in tech. Day to day, we're focused on making that a great, great experience. Partially because simply the market is so big. There's 4 million, easily 4 million unfilled tech jobs in the US. It's growing at like 250,000, 300,000 new jobs a year. If you take all of the undergrad programs, all of the graduate programs, the number of computer scientists getting outputted each year are about 125,000. And it is a very non-diverse group. Our education model has, our student base is much, much more diverse to others, which is something employers are demanding. So I think we could easily be at hundreds of thousands of students, just in tech, just in the US. There are, however, Austin, our CEO, always loves to think of the future. So he spends a lot of time thinking about other areas. So certainly there's places like places where there's enormous employer demand is obviously the main area that would be interesting to our model. Because if you want to learn Russian history, that's great, but that's not going to fit with a outcomes-based program like ours. But if you want to learn a vocational trade, and whether that's nursing assistant, whether that is trucking, whether that is some other highly in-demand profession. But one of the things about technology is that there's web programming, there is data science, there's also like specific AWS certs that are very, very highly in demand, cybersecurity, Salesforce.
Yeah, it's highly specialized.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things is the number one reason a lot of these companies can't sell software is because there's not enough people trained in the software. So that goes from, we have pretty close relationships with a lot of major employers and a lot of SaaS companies. And I think there's going to be some exciting stuff we'll be able to do in the future in conjunction with those.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I'm on the board of CBO, which is an enterprise SaaS company, and you're absolutely right. The ability to be able to understand technically how the software works and how it solves problems is a really big pain point that we're seeing for sure. So let's push that one step further. Do you see enterprises actually getting into this space? Like I know Shopify as an example, right? They have their own boot camp, so to speak. Do you see that as a trend that's going to emerge? Is like employer education? I mean, even when we were growing up, there were certain programs where it was like, no, just bring me some raw talent and I will teach you the way, right? I don't need you to sort of come from, and today even more, people are saying, I don't even need the degree. I just want raw talent. Do you see that happening?
Definitely people are trying to do it. I think the challenge is, I think this is harder than a lot of people think. It's really hard. There's a reason no one's really done this before at scale. And it's not because it's not just one thing, right? I would say just take, for example, what we've learned with our program. I mean, you mentioned our funding round and our scale and a lot of our successes. Like, we didn't get here overnight. Not only did our president of the school, who's set up our sort of curriculum methodology, our pedagogy, had 15 years experience working at, being a leading instructor at boot camps, working at Apple on their education systems, et cetera. There's a lot of little things that have to go right. This is really less like, there's certain companies and certain things you do, like maybe like a Snapchat or Google, where you come up with one breakthrough and it's sort of working from day one. Then there are companies that are like Tesla, which is like, you have to get 13 things all right, all at the same time to get it to work. And we're really more in that other model. So
Yeah.
I think that it's just really hard to do it consistently.
I think that's really interesting. And I guess that's my next question, right? Is what does it take to get it right? What are some of the pain points that you're still seeing, in virtual, live, remote, immersive experiences that, you're focused on solving and you think still need to be solved as sort of the world is forced to look at this as a new paradigm?
Yeah, I think, so I think once again, what we try to do right is we try to get a very relevant curriculum for employers. We try to deliver it in a way which takes into account all of the research of the benefits of live instruction, the benefits of community, and the benefits of something which is a little more inside baseball, but mastery-based progression, where you don't continue until you've learned the skill you learn. So if you take a unit, you haven't figured out, you don't progress with the rest of the class to the next unit. You will repeat what you don't know, which, by the way, is not that easy to do in a real world environment, because logistically, if you haven't figured out that one class in programming, the next class, how do you repeat that same class? Even logistically, like, where would you go? You'd have to have 30 different classes all doing things. We literally have an employee whose full-time job it is moving people in and out of Slack channels. So we're allowed to do things that are in our remote sort of software-based back-end learning that are just fundamentally different that you can do in real world. And then basically, of course, we have the social motivation wrapped around it, all the job search services wrapped around it, and the practical real-based learning, which for us is just a fundamentally different thing. The answer to, though, like what we still need to do, or what the industry still faces, is like, basically you're facing a lot of the challenges you'd face in a traditional classroom. So you have to engage students, you have to motivate them, you have to evaluate their skills appropriately without spending too much time on the evaluation. You have to manage the relationships, you have to create a community that protects and encourages the learning environment. Those things are not easy to get right. It's funny, I use the Peloton example, or you could use a Soul Cycle or something like that. Like, there's a reason that like the knockoffs to those are just like not really quite as good. Like, you won't spend 3 months doing one of those, but you'll spend a month and you sort of churn out. Like, the level of being able to do this at a high quality level is very, very important. One of the things we do about cohort learning, which is different, is we start new cohorts every month. So we're set up as in many ways, with the Silicon Valley ethos of learning and iterating. So every month we will set up a new program. We take into account feedback and data from the students who have done it. We take into feedback and data from the hiring partners at the other end we have very close relationships with. And we basically do a change log and we iterate each program. So in the web program, we're on like version over 100. Contrast that with even the better colleges, where basically maybe an individual professor or associate professor will have changed and made their program better. But as soon as that professor leaves, someone's starting with a whole new model. And so we are able to iterate better there are things about the system which gives us fundamental advantages in iteration when you set up a system that way.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Just the notion of feedback and iteration in a cohort-based experience that's frequent creates that opportunity, and the notion that it's V100. So of course, Matt, I have to dig into this ISA model, because at the end of the day, that's a huge part of what has made Lambda School, super famous and also revolutionary. Tell me more about that, the relationship. Do you think this is going to become the norm? And just maybe you can explain to the audience a bit about how exactly it works and what some of the, benefits and some of the challenges are.
Yeah. So income share agreement, ISA, is the model I talked about a little at the front, where essentially when you come into the school, when you sign your income share agreement, you pay nothing up front, and you will not pay anything until you get a high-paying job. And then when you do, pay 17% of your monthly income for up to 2 years, or up until you hit a 30K cap. And so in a high-paying job, we define as over $50,000, which I know to some of the coastal major metro people might not seem like a lot. The average salary of folks coming in is, I think it's $23,000. Our average salary of someone leaving Lambda is, I believe, $76,000. And so this is pretty life-changing for folks. These are, and we certainly have lots of people who are in, New York or San Francisco or Silicon Valley, where the norm is really six figures, right? But if you're in rural Utah or Iowa doing Salesforce admin for a agriculture firm, $55,000 is an insanely good salary for most folks, and considerably above the median income. So that's the model. So listen, the benefits of that model are, what you're doing is if you want to go to school to and get education for the purpose of improving your family's lot in life, improving your financial circumstances, this is a great model. Because what it does is it fundamentally aligns your success with the success of the school in a way that we really haven't seen before. So frankly, listen, the traditional education system has a lot of very, very well-meaning people in there, by and large, very well-meaning. But sometimes you can have well-meaning systems that aren't set up for maximal results for all the participants. And so frankly, a lot of schools, it actually, although they care in theory to people's success after the school, the reality is the financials of the school, be it a for-profit or a nonprofit, are driven by admissions, right? And not only admissions, but technically, the longer you spend in the school, the better the school does, just from a numbers perspective, right? And what that does is that creates a lot of misaligned incentives in the system for creating a healthy organization, which is in some ways at odds with what the student wants. So for us, frankly, we want you in school the least a possible amount of time to make the most income after. And for us, the way the ISA model works, don't forget, is for us, it's not enough for you to be admitted. It's not enough for you to be admitted and graduate. It's not enough for you to be admitted, graduate, and get a job. You have to be admitted, graduate, get a job. It's got to be a high-paying job. You have to keep the job and get promoted. And that's when we really win. So that's a pretty aligned system for the student. So I think in many ways it is it's a more straightforward, aligned model for students who want to get a great job at the other end.
Right. Super interesting and makes a lot of sense. I mean, even coming from the ad tech world, which you and I, very early on came from, the shift towards performance advertising versus CPMs, is just how I think
Yeah,
about what you're doing for education, right? Who wants to
interesting.
pay if people aren't, actually succeeding? So I think it's really interesting. I know
Interesting
there's so many
analogy.
other questions I want to ask you. Matt, you're an investor. You run a super successful early stage fund, and you're in the heart of the future of edtech. Now, I know you don't have an edtech thesis per se, but I'd love to hear what you think is coming in the next 18 to 24 months in terms of how education is being disrupted and what themes and trends you're paying attention to or seeing in your incoming pitches.
Yeah, it's this is a good question. One of the things. I've been angel investing for about 10 years, and we are. It's basically our fund is me and five friends who were friends back in the Facebook days, and we've had a tremendous amount of fun doing it. I would say my biggest learning from angel investing is it's better to be lucky than be good. I would say hard work and being excited about what you do tends to increase your chance of being lucky. And so, listen, generally what you're looking for in all these things is, as an investor, is you're looking for a big, big market and a big vision with a team that can credibly either get there or iterate their way there. This is, by the way, I'm talking like seed and pre-seed, so early stage. I think some of the interesting trends, well, it's interesting because I think Mastermind sort of hits on one of the trends, which is the idea that that creators and that folks who are the innovators and the creators need better platforms sometimes to communicate with people. And so I think, in a sense, what we saw was with like Google, for instance, you had a search engine, and that was great. And there are all these vertical search engines that got built from it. And I think similarly, what you're seeing is platforms that people go to now for learning, like a YouTube or like a Udemy or Coursera or other things. But there are being a lot of optimizations done on picking different verticals or niches, both on the creator side and as well on the audience side, to provide more benefit to those. So that's I guess one of the trends that I think is exciting. The other which you hit on, is basically just using these new platforms and new technologies to better deliver learning. So obviously, with the sort of app ecosystem, we've seen a bunch of things happen in sort of mobile in that delivery mechanism. And I think there are some interesting ways that people are delivering sort of micro learning environments through sort of other creative distribution platforms.
Super interesting. I'm fascinated by that. And when you think about two things, one, as an investor at Graph, and somebody who's made all of these investments, do you think about finding the next Facebook or Uber or Lambda School? Like, is that sort of your motivation in building Graph, or how do you think about deploying capital at this early stage?
Yes, I would love to find one of those. And it's interesting. There's different paradigms for success. I mean, some of our most successful investments have actually been pretty major pivots. I mean, one investment we did was Blue Apron, which the meal delivery service that went public, sort of the first sort of DTC company to go public. And they originally started off as a Kickstarter for science projects. That's what I liked. That was the idea I backed. But the team was great, and they pivoted pretty dramatically to a new model. And you certainly, it's the frank reality is it's, it's really easy to be right as an early stage angel investor 99.9% of the time, because you just say no to everybody. And so one of the things you have to realize as an early stage investor to find those Facebooks, those Ubers, the Lambda schools, is that things are going to look a little weird early days, or maybe it won't be the exact right market, or the team has potential but still has to get there, or there may be a pivot. You have to sort of squint and really, it's easy to say why any idea is not a good idea. There is, in our group, when we talk about things, there's no
huge smile
benefit to say why something's not going to work. That's easy. What's hard is to find every idea, try to find the nugget of what could work, and try to walk yourself through that, and to see, is this a team who could get you there? But to be honest, there's a lot of things. There's some heuristics you can go on and experience, but there's a lot of this. At least the way I have done it, is based on feel for the entrepreneur and gut instinct. But our stage is so early in some ways, sometimes pre-product. But it's exciting for me. I like to work really hard at my full-time job, and angel investing, which I've been fortunate enough to be in a position to do, is a great way to sort of scratch the creative itch, in some ways to give back to the community that helped me so much to get where I am today. And also to sort of grow in terms of ideas and scope, and, an excuse to hang out more with folks like you. So really appreciate it.
No, I love that. And I think, one of the things you said that I think is very relevant to what we're doing on these sessions is thinking a little bit about what are these skills that people need to succeed in the future. And, I'm interested in you juxtaposing kind of the qualities and traits of the most successful participants at Lambda School, the people who are getting that promotion. What is it, that's beyond just their coding skills, with some of the entrepreneurs who you're backing with very little, evidence, because it's super early stage. Are there parallels in terms of the kinds of people, the qualities, or some more of the, the qualitative assessment of what it takes to succeed, or is it wildly different?
Yeah, listen, it comes down essentially to aptitude and attitude. And I think in a lot of instances, attitude is the greater predictor of success. So you have a certain sort of core advantage or disadvantage, but someone who can work hard, who has the grit, who can stick with something, is just going to be on a long-term, more successful path than someone who is really smart, really gifted, but hasn't really figured things out in a couple of months, or loses motivation, or loses or doesn't have the work, the drive to work. So for example, in Lambda School, one of the things we noticed was, because we're very data driven, is that, we get people who are have degrees from Berkeley and MIT and others, coming to Lambda, or people who've had very successful professions, and who have very sort of impressive, quote unquote, resumes, come to Lambda. We also have people who literally have never had a resume before, or if you looked at it, there's no indication from sort of the traditional process that this would be someone who would succeed. But we found other non-obvious things that sometimes position folks in the latter group much more successful than the folks in the former sort of more privileged group. I'll be honest, just some anecdotal things is I would, at Lambda, we've tended to see a lot of success with people who have backgrounds in the military, backgrounds in sports, serious sports, backgrounds in dance, backgrounds in bodybuilding, martial arts, basically something where you're used to working hard, and basically working hard for 2 or 3 months, not seeing much payoff, but then 4 or 5 months in, really turning the corner and seeing tremendous benefit. That's the most important thing, right? If it takes you a little longer to learn something, but you're going to put in the reps, you're going to put in the days, you're going to put in the efforts, and you're going to get through it, you'll learn it. And by the way, at Lambda, if it takes you not 6, 7 months, if it takes you 9 months, 12 months, we'll let you take 9 or 12 months as long as you're in the program to do it. And often the people who take a little longer, but who have the grit and resilience, actually do better at the end because they have a bunch of traits that, frankly, in the workforce, are more valued and certainly don't come across, are certainly much more valuable to us as a learning institution and people providing great quality talent for high-paying jobs than is someone who just happens to be pretty smart and pretty lucky with their background. So I would say similarly, you want to see that grit and drive in an entrepreneur. And listen, if I think of people like Zuck or Travis or Austin, who have been enormously fortunate to work with, I mean, you don't want to get in their way of them achieving their outcome, and they really want to work hard, and they will they will put in that extra effort. They'll work that extra evening, and they will they have that extra passion for achieving their goal.
I love that. And in fact, that's going to be my last question for you, Matt, because there's very few people, certainly who I know, who have such a phenomenal career like you've had, working specifically for these icons who have really created this tech world. Mark Zuckerberg, Travis, and now Austin, who's clearly on a path. Tell us a bit more around, some of the traits that you've observed that are shared, and then a couple of the differences or the nuances of how these, really iconic leaders are leading their companies today.
That's a good question. I consider myself enormously fortunate to have got to work with this group. I mean, some of what I consider some of the defining entrepreneurs of our generation, and having got to interact with them has been tremendous for me. Like I said, better to be lucky than good. And so certainly I've been lucky a lot in my career. I would say what they have in common, I would say, is vision, judgment, and ability to recruit a great team. And so, they all had very ambitious visions that seemed sort of a little wacky at the time. And they had the judgment to make enough good calls to make those, to make it happen. Generally just like would the judgment there's a bunch of things that, by the way, on the judgment side, just fit into sort of the Overton window or whatever of normal decisions you'd make. It's having the judgment of when to make the crazy bets and then when to show those work or don't work. That those are the really impressive things. Just an analogy that comes to mind, an anecdote that comes to mind in the second, in terms of the judgment call and being able to make big ambitious bets, is I remember when we launched, we're at Facebook, we were going to launch chat, and which is now Messenger, obviously. And at the time, everyone had chat services. And what chat services is you would have your inbox and then you'd have a chat, a separate chat. And Mark thought about it and he said, no, we should combine them into one. And basically there was a whole bunch of the company who was like, really? We got to try something new here. Can't we just tag on chat and get another 40% engagement like everyone else does? He's like, no, I think this makes a lot of sense. And it seemed really weird at the time. Users hated it because they always hate anything new. And he had the vision to say hey, this is one of the bets to make. And I think you've seen a lot of success. You've seen, how that can change the trajectory of things. Similarly, I would say Travis with doing Uber Eats early when it seemed sort of crazy to try a new model when the first one hadn't fully grown. Anyways, the last thing, sorry, I went off a little bit. I could talk about this stuff forever, but the last thing I think is similar is their ability just to create this aura and this excitement around what they do and recruit the right kind of people. So, with Zuck, that was recruiting one of the greatest young engineering teams in the history of technology. And, the groups that he recruited from both traditional sources, like the whole Microsoft crew who came over, sort of early Microsoft guys from Harvard, And then less traditional areas like Adam D'Angelo, who he just knew from high school, but sort of identified as a real leader. I mean, that was an insanely important thing because the tech platform Facebook built on was non-trivially better than everyone else's. I think in Travis's case, it was recruiting the operational talent and one of the best operational teams, sort of the tech world has ever seen. And then in Austin's case, it was recruiting a combination of folks who had, really innovative ways to change learning, with also a group from the Silicon Valley side who wanted to figure out something that could iterate, scale, and be standardized and keep getting better. And then tying it all together with folks who have money. In all those instances, all those people were tremendous fundraisers. So.
For sure. I could chat for like another hour on just that topic or on so many more topics, but we have an amazing community who listens to our Future of Learning Game Changer sessions. So we have about 8 minutes left, if that's good for you, Matt. And we're going to just do rapid fire, a bunch of quick questions from some great folks here. So the first question is from Josh Donor, and his question is really around regulation. And how do you deal with regulation as Lambda School? Is there an accreditation? Do people do you need to be regulated by state or by province for what you're offering?
Yeah. So so basically I'll speak to the US because it's our main market. But for us, we're actually fans of regulating the income share agreement at a federal level. Because right now it's basically sort of kicked down to states to figure out what to do with it. We've spent a tremendous amount of time making the income share agreement incredibly straightforward. It's actually a wonderfully well-written document and something we're really proud of. In some ways, like a terms of service, it can just be written very confusing. People don't know, or it can be explained very well. We're pretty proud of that. But we've actually been advocates of regulation, and some of it has hit the floor of Congress, but Congress has been a little distracted with a number of other things to get regulation, essentially because there's us and there's some other folks who we know are good actors. We don't want bad actors in the system. So we are for regulation. We're for smart regulation. I would say there are, in terms of accreditation, there are real benefits to being accredited. Certainly something we've looked into. The problem is there's also drawbacks, and this is the flip side of regulation, right? Is like you don't want to have just a Wild West, because then you get some like really bad actors, and it's bad for us in the ecosystem because we know we can compete at giving the best offer. On the bad side, when things get overly regulated, you get problems with innovation. So, for example, one of the problems with us being accredited right now would be, there's a couple like random things you have to do. Like we would have to hire like librarian on staff. We don't have a library, but it's like that's one of the things you have to do. Another thing we would have to do is you have to submit changes in your curriculum. I believe it's about a year in advance. We change our curriculum every month. So like that's not helpful to us or helpful for students. So our hope is that this sector does get regulated, and it gets regulated in a smart way that has the best benefit for students and for people entering into these programs.
For sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. I'm just doing this rapid fire. We'll do like 30-second answers because there's a couple and there's some really good ones. So Ron Nakawa, who's a regular guest on our series, he asked, do you limit enrollment? And if so, how do you determine who is admitted? And I think that's a really interesting question.
Yeah. Thank you, Ron. Okay, so pretty quickly, yes, we do limit enrollment, and we use a variety of tests and interviews in the enrollment process to figure out who's going to be most likely to succeed. So we have both sort of aptitude tests that we do in a standardized form. We also have code challenges that we do, and we are always. This is one of the areas we look most closely with at data, because we want to regress out all the time. What could we have known more at admissions to make sure we admit in the right students? Don't forget, by the way, once again, one of the nice things about being completely aligned is anything we do there is almost by definition better for students, because what we don't want is a student, for us, the worst case, a student spends 7 months with us and then either graduates and doesn't get a job. It's actually better if someone just dropped out the first month for them, because there's lower sunk costs on both hands. So basically, us getting better at admissions is really important, because we want every student who comes into Lambda to succeed. So it's something we spend a lot of time on iterating that process. So that's another thing we change probably about once a quarter based on feedback. But right now it's an aptitude test and a code challenge, and then you talk to someone on the phone.
Amazing. So we just have time for one more question, because we got to wrap up before people have to run for lunch. Yeah, I know. It's there's so many good ones. I thought this was an interesting one from Peter Ross, who says, "Is there an agenda for internationalization, and do you have cultural specifics? Have cultural specifics been identified that need to be considered?"
Yeah, so that's a great question. So internationalization. So we've made forays into Europe and Africa. And what we've seen is we've had a lot of success everywhere doing this model. On the cultural specific stuff, I mean, honestly, in Africa, we had issues simply because of the sort of local economy. And other instances, there were circumstances that would hit our students that were some things that were pretty hard for us to understand. I mean, having reliable Wi-Fi, in some places having reliable electricity, certainly having access to laptops, were not that straightforward. And so for us, if we want to find people with potential, find them high-paying jobs, get them all the way there, and sort of give them the scaffolding to do it, we ran into some challenges there. In terms of broader, like, cultural differences in how people learn, I don't know if I have as thoughtful an answer to that as I'm sure some folks have. So I'll punt on the rest of that, but it's a very interesting question.
Oh, super good. Matt, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for spending this time and unpacking some incredible insights about where the future of learning is headed. What you're doing at Lambda School is definitely in the present, but I believe it's absolutely the future. And I really appreciate you joining us to share your insights. So thank you so much. And just really quickly, we will be back on Wednesday with an incredible organization called the Knowledge Society. Naveed Nathu will be speaking with us. And next Monday is Salim Ismail, who was the founding executive director of Singularity University and is now the chairman of something called OpenEXO, also talking about how to teach people about the future. And we have incredible partners on the series, all institutions and organizations who are very passionate about where the future of learning is headed. So Toronto Life Insider, York University, General Assembly, the Knowledge Society, Getting Smart, TechTO, Rotman, CIX, W North. Thank you so much. And of course, thank you to our awesome team at Game Changer Sessions and Mastermind for making this all possible. Thanks, Nathan, who produces this, Corey Marr, Maggie, Samantha, Jerome. You guys are awesome. We will see you on Wednesday. Have a wonderful day. And it's 1:00 right on the dot. So there you go.